Some of the strangest moments in Joe Rogan's podcast history aren't the wild stories about UFOs, Bigfoot, or psychedelic trips. They're the moments when a guest suddenly clams up, dodges a question, or changes the subject so abruptly you can almost hear the gears grinding in their head. It's those subtle shifts, a flicker in their eyes, an awkward laugh, a too smooth answer, that hint at something deeper. Because every so often, someone walks into that studio not just to have a conversation, but to control one. Paul Stamets is one of the most respected mycologists in the world. He's not just a scientist, he's the public face of modern mushroom research, author of bestsellers, supplier of supplements, collaborator with the US government on biodefense projects after 9/11. He's been on Rogan's show multiple times, and fans love his deep dives into the fungal world. But during his second appearance, something happened that even regular viewers found unsettling. Joe casually brought up portobello mushrooms in the middle of a wide-ranging discussion about fungi. His tone was light, curious. He probably expected a nerdy but harmless answer. Instead, Stamets froze. His expression tightened, his voice dropped. "Paul, this is an explosive area of conversation, and it puts my life in danger." Joe, caught completely off guard, laughed awkwardly. But Stamets doubled down. He refused to elaborate, then moved the discussion along like nothing happened. At first glance, it could have been theatrical, a quirky way of saying, "I'd rather not." But here's the thing. Paul has been open before about portobello mushrooms containing agarotine, a compound that can turn into potentially carcinogenic substances if eaten raw. Back in 2006, he went as far as comparing eating raw portobellos to smoking, except the tumors could grow all over your body, not just in your lungs. So why stay silent on Rogan? Theories began swirling. Portobellos are part of a $50 billion global mushroom industry. Paul has influence across that entire market. Publicly damaging the reputation of one of the most consumed mushrooms in the world could create ripple effects, not just economically, but politically. Mushroom farming in Pennsylvania alone accounts for over half of the U.S. supply, and historically there have been whispers of organized crime controlling production in certain regions. Jokes about a portobello mafia started to feel less like jokes. And then there's the personal history. In the 1980s, Paul was close to Stephen Pollock, a fellow mycologist who was murdered under circumstances so suspicious they sound like a crime thriller. Pollock was funding his research through illicit prescription sales when he was shot in the head. Police identified suspects, but the district attorney refused to prosecute. Allegedly, a stolen police tape even contained discussions implicating officers in the murder. But it sat hidden for decades because people feared being killed for revealing it. Paul himself has admitted to organizing secret underground conferences with the likes of Albert Hoffman and Terence McKenna, where psychedelics were openly handled despite heavy DEA restrictions. He had the only license that made it legal, but everyone knew a SWAT raid could happen at any second. When someone like that says talking about a mushroom could get them killed, maybe it's not paranoia. Fast forward to June 2025. Kash Patel, the FBI director, sits across from Joe Rogan. For nearly 20 minutes, he calmly explains why the public should accept the official conclusion on Jeffrey Epstein's case and move on. His tone is measured. Almost too measured. Then Joe reads a live tweet from Elon Musk. Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. Patel's face shifts instantly. It's subtle but undeniable, the look of someone who knows he's been cornered on air. Here's the contradiction. Before taking the FBI's top job, Patel had built a reputation as a crusader against the deep state. He'd appeared on over 50 podcasts, sometimes outright praising QAnon, calling for the Epstein client list to be made public, even publishing a book called Government Gangsters, The Deep State, The Truth, and the Battle for Our Democracy. He'd vowed that on day one as FBI director, he'd turn the Hoover Building into a museum documenting corruption. Yet here he was, defending secrecy, downplaying evidence, suggesting there was nothing left to see. And this wasn't a man new to the subject. He'd personally overseen parts of the Epstein investigation. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Patel fidgeted, avoided eye contact, and gave vague answers. In defending his past work as a lawyer, he even mentioned representing child traffickers as a way to argue about legal defense ethics. An odd choice of example, that seemed to hang in the air for far too long. By the end of the segment, it felt less like a conversation and more like an FBI press briefing disguised as a podcast. Mike Baker is the kind of guest who seems to instantly put people at ease. He's got the self-deprecating humor, the casual way of telling a story, and that dry delivery that makes even the most unsettling admissions sound like bar chatter. But under the charm is a resume that demands scrutiny. 15 years with the CIA, operations on multiple continents, and a career that didn't exactly end when he left the agency. And that's where the suspicion starts. There's an old saying in intelligence circles, there's no such thing as a former CIA officer. Once you're in, you're never really out. Baker's post-agency ventures seem to reinforce that. He's the CEO of Diligence LLC, a private intelligence firm that has been repeatedly accused of functioning as a front for continued agency work. The company's board has ties to Bush-era power networks, and its connections to former CIA Director William Webster are not exactly a secret. When he appears on Rogan's podcast, and he's been on roughly 20 times, his style is what intelligence professionals call a limited hangout. The trick is simple but effective. Reveal partial truths to earn credibility, while withholding or diverting from the more damaging details. Baker openly admits to covert operations, political interference, and stealing state secrets, but always in a way that reframes these actions as obvious, necessary, even patriotic. Of course we steal secrets. That's the point, he once told Joe, leaning back in his chair with a half smile. Of course we influence governments. Everyone does it. By treating these as givens, he normalizes them. The audience stops thinking about whether the actions are right or wrong, and instead accepts them as just the way the world works. It's a powerful rhetorical move, one that disarms criticism before it starts. What's striking is how often Baker's appearances align with periods of heightened public interest in CIA activity. When headlines break about foreign coups, surveillance leaks, or military interventions, Baker shows up on Rogan to clear the air. And yet, when Joe pushes for specifics, names, operational details, accountability, the conversation hits a wall of plausible deniability. He can't discuss classified matters, he says, or it's outside his lane. Baker's real genius isn't in lying, it's in telling just enough truth to make lying unnecessary. By shaping the frame of the conversation itself, he ensures the most sensitive realities never have to be spoken aloud. David Grush walked into the Rogan studio carrying the kind of credentials that make skeptics sit up straight. 14 years in military intelligence, stints at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office, and a congressional mandate to investigate unidentified aerial phenomena. On paper, he wasn't just credible. He was the insider UFO believers had been waiting decades for. Over 3 hours, Grush laid out claims that, in any other setting, would sound like science fiction. He spoke of non-human origin technical vehicles, alien spacecraft recovered and stored by the U.S. government. He claimed there were biologics, a sterile-sounding word that in plain language meant dead alien pilots. And he insisted these crash retrieval programs had been running for decades, hidden behind layers of secrecy and compartmentalization. The weight behind his words came from the fact that he'd already made these statements under oath to Congress. But the question hanging over the table was the same one that haunts every intelligence whistleblower. Why now? For all the drama of the revelations, the timing raised eyebrows. Grush's testimony arrived during a wave of renewed UFO media coverage and at a point when defense analysts were warning about advanced drone technology from rival nations. Even Rogan, while clearly intrigued, couldn't help suggesting an alternative, that the UFO narrative might be a perfect cover for classified military programs. That idea isn't pulled from thin air. In the 1980s, the Air Force allegedly planted UFO rumors around Area 51 to deflect attention from the development of the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. The public obsessed over flying saucers, while the real aircraft remained hidden in plain sight. Could Grush be an unwitting part of a similar campaign? The possibility creates a paradox. If Grush is telling the truth, it's the most significant revelation in human history. If he's repeating carefully planted half-truths, then the real story is still locked away, and the UFO angle is just another layer of misdirection. Either way, his appearance left Rogan's audience with more questions than answers, which might be exactly the point. Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities should be one of the most exciting guests possible for history lovers. Instead, his appearance became infamous for the wrong reasons. When Joe brought up the possibility that the Sphinx or pyramids might predate current estimates, Hawass claimed he'd never even heard of such theories, despite public debates with Graham Hancock about exactly that. His default rebuttal? That's wrong. I investigated it. Every claim of hidden chambers or alternative timelines was dismissed outright, often followed by a plug for his own book. By the end, the conversation had devolved into a frustrating loop, with Joe later calling it the worst podcast I've ever done, a masterclass in how to appear open-minded while shutting down every uncomfortable line of inquiry. Adam Conover made a career out of debunking myths and questioning assumptions. But on Rogan, when pressed about sports and gender differences, his reasoning stumbled hard. He claimed basketball was designed for male bodies because of the way the ball moves around. Even he laughed at the absurdity. When the conversation shifted to trans athletes, Joe laid out biological advantages in detail, decades of testosterone affecting bone density, hip structure, and tendon strength. Conover's counter? Repeated name drops of trans friends and vague promises to look at the research. The irony was glaring. The man whose brand was challenging ideas suddenly had nothing but weak appeals to authority when his own beliefs were questioned. Then there's Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's chief medical correspondent. In one of Rogan's most replayed clips, Joe directly confronted him about CNN calling his prescribed COVID medication horse dewormer. Gupta admitted it was wrong, but when Joe asked why his network lied, Gupta said he didn't know, and crucially, hadn't asked. The next night, Don Lemon doubled down on air, reframing the statement as technically true, while ignoring the misleading context. It was a textbook example of institutional gaslighting, concede nothing, even when caught. Across all these moments, the pattern is clear. Some guests come with information they don't want to share. Others are there to reshape narratives in real time. Some arrive thinking they can glide through 3 hours without being challenged, only to hit an unexpected wall. And every once in a while, the cracks show. If you're paying attention, those cracks tell you far more than the polished talking points ever will. So keep watching closely, question everything, and if you want more breakdowns like this, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next time a mask slips on Rogan's show, you're going to want to see it here first.